Okay, hey guys. So the second example comes from my own research. Um, over the past year, I've been writing a paper with a colleague of mine, another professor here at CNU named John Kemabreco. He's in the political science department. And we've been trying to analyze some data with regards to the 2016 presidential elections. Our paper has to do with basically what got Trump elected. And so I want to run through this example. I want to run through it in some level of detail to really give you guys a sense of, okay, well, what are the steps that are involved in finding the data and then subsequently trying to get it to answer some sort of broad social question like this, okay? So, you know, so I want you guys to kind of, think back a couple of years, 4 years now almost, to the 2016 elections and hearing, that Trump had won. Now, Trump's victory was unexpected. Even days before the election, they were projecting with fairly high confidence that Hillary was going to win. And so after he won, a lot of academics kind of turned to this question and they asked themselves, what is it that allowed Trump to deliver such an unexpected victory? And there are sort of two schools of thought when it comes to why he won, or there are two main schools of thought, okay? And I'm sure you guys are familiar with both of these. So one is, this concept that it was all about economics. Trump campaigned very heavily in the parts of the country that are known as the Rust Belt, states that have been really hit hard by the departure of manufacturing from the United States, the movement of manufacturing to, Mexico and China and other developing countries. And, Trump was a little bit different compared to some of the previous Republican candidates. He was against free trade. He was against, this type of offshoring of American jobs. And so the idea is, that really, his cementing his victory in those states really was what helped him win the general election. So just to give you guys a good sense of this, let me play a clip for you guys. Okay. We'll just watch a little bit of this clip.
When Donald J. Trump takes the oath of office on the west front of the U.S. Capitol on Friday, he will be there in no small part because of the votes of people in Michigan, a state that was supposed to be a lock for Hillary Clinton. Tonight, ABC's Terry Moran goes to Michigan to hear how Trump voters feel about their choice now.
Now, only in the Midwest does somebody actually stop. So nice. Love the Midwest.
We're in Michigan on a trip through Macomb County, just north of Detroit. Blue-collar town, historically home to auto workers, union members. This was supposed to be a stronghold in the Democrats' Great Blue Wall, but it crumbled here. Macomb swung to Trump bigly. Trump 54% to Clinton's 42%.
We will make Michigan into the manufacturing hub of the world once again.
When Trump came here, the national media laughed at him. They said there's no way he's going to win Macomb County. He wiped Hillary out here. So we want to find out what the people of Macomb County feel as the inauguration arrives.
Our first stop, Lori's Cafe in Warren.
So this is a place which has been very hard hit by free trade and the movement of jobs overseas, and people very, very dissatisfied.
Some see President-elect Trump more as someone who'd fit in around here rather than an elite Manhattan business mogul. And Trump capitalized on the real anxiety here, a sense that the middle-class way of life is slipping out of reach.
I said if he wins Macomb,
This county.
if he keeps Oakland County close, which he did, he's got a shot at winning Michigan.
That's how he won.
And it's how he did it. He flipped, and I know nationally, he flipped 200 counties. Now, with all due respect, Vladimir Putin didn't do that. The voters did.
Still, these Midwesterners aren't completely happy about Donald Trump.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a sense of it. Okay, that's a very common narrative of Trump's victory. But I'm sure, as many of you guys are aware, there's another narrative. Okay, others saw a sort of darker side to his rise. issues of racial prejudice, Islamophobia, distrust of immigrants. Okay, as you all know, Trump has a very strong anti-immigration policy, and a lot of people see that as sort of scapegoating the problems of the United States onto these minority populations. Okay, so just to give you guys something emblematic of that theory. Okay, let me play this other clip. This is from right from election night, right after they declared Trump to be the winner.
Well, look, first of all, congratulations. Both of you guys were...
We're not there yet.
Well, you're further than anybody said you would be. And I have enough class, and I was raised well enough to say when you outdo...
Yes, sir. Thank you.
When you outdo expectations, good for you. But there's another side to this. People have talked about a miracle. I'm hearing about a nightmare. It's hard to be a parent tonight for a lot of us. You tell your kids, don't be a bully. You tell your kids, don't be a bigot. You tell your kids, do your homework and be prepared. And then you have this outcome, and you have people putting children to bed tonight, and they're afraid of breakfast. They're afraid of, how do I explain this to my children? I have Muslim friends who are texting me tonight saying, should I leave the country? I have families of immigrants that are terrified tonight. This was many things. This was a rebellion against the elites. True, it was a complete reinvention of politics and polls, it's true. But it was also something else. We've talked about race. We've talked about everything but race tonight. We've talked about income. We've talked about class. We've talked about region. We haven't talked about race. This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president in part. And that's the part where the pain comes.
Okay. So, so two, very different narratives of why Trump won in 2016. And whatever your views are, whatever your political views may be, as a social scientist, as an economist, John and I, we were interested in trying to shed some light on this question. Obviously, both of these factors contributed. They played some role in Trump's rise, right? Both economic factors and issues of prejudice clearly were involved in the election. But we want to go further than that. We want to know, can we try to somehow establish the relative importance of these traits to establish which of these narratives was the predominant one in Trump's rise? And so, it's hard to do this using some sort of mathematical theory. I don't know how you would do this if you were trying to apply, strictly the tools of microeconomic theory. But with the tools of applied economics, with the right data, you can get a handle. You can try to answer this question. Okay. And so let me try to rephrase this question in maybe the language of applied microeconomics. Applied microeconomics likes to think about things in terms of dependent and independent variables. So in asking this question, our dependent variable, the variable that we view as our outcome, as our bottom line, was Trump's victory, Trump's electoral success all over the country that night in 2016. Now, our independent variables, okay, the variables that we view as affecting or bringing about the dependent variable, include the degree of economic decline, the prevalence of anti-immigrant or racially prejudiced views among the electorate, and a whole bunch of other potential factors. Sorry, I got to turn my portrait back on here. A whole bunch of other potential factors that may have led people to vote for Trump. Factors like gender, religion, or whatnot. Okay. And the idea is to find data, to collect data about each one of these things. And if we can collect data about all of these topics, then we can use a number of statistical tools in order to establish the relative weight, the relative importance of all of these different independent variables. Okay, So let me talk a little bit about how we went through that data collection process. Okay. So let's start with our dependent variable, the election outcomes. And it was relatively easy, actually, to find vote totals for the 2016 elections. And we were able to find these down to the level of the county. And of course, these are reported to the Federal Election Commission as a result of the process of tabulating everybody's votes. Okay, and so here we have a map of the counties that Trump won. Okay, so blue obviously indicates a stronger Democratic vote. Red indicates a stronger Republican vote. Okay, so here we have the data about our dependent variable in a pretty detailed way. Okay, down to the level of the individual county, who won which county. Okay, so so with that in hand, we turn to our first major independent variable, which was the degree of economic decline. All right. The idea is, if we can also collect data on economic decline that's down to this level, that's down to the county level, then maybe we can correlate whether that pattern of economic decline looks anything like this pattern of votes. Okay. And so, if you had asked this question maybe 20 years ago, the answer would have been no way. There's no way that you could get, some measure of the decline of, in total jobs for each county in the United States, to that level of detail. But today that's no longer the case. So the Census Bureau, the U.S. Census Bureau, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics have been teaming up in a groundbreaking initiative called the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics Program, the LEHD. You don't need to know the name of that, okay? But it's a major data source. And this program produces a data set called the QWI, or the Quarterly Workforce Indicators. And this is some of the most detailed publicly available jobs data in the United States today. And so let me show you guys what this data is capable of. So this picture right here, this is a picture of the front of a book, okay? And it's a book I read about 2 years ago. Called Boom Bust Exodus. Fascinating book. I think the three words sum up the book very well. The book tells the story of a town in Illinois, Galesburg, Illinois, that was home to a very large appliance factory. And this factory, at one point made like a third of all the refrigerators in the United States or something like that. And so they had this big boom, okay, during the 50s and 60s when this factory got built. But then around the 2000s, there was a bust. The factory closed down, and Maytag, who was the owner of the factory at that point, decided to take that factory essentially and move it across the border to Mexico. And so subsequent to this bust, there was an exodus of people from the town. And so the book tells the story of, what happened to the town, of the social consequences of this factory closing down. It also tells the story of the consequences in Mexico of the new factory being built. So it's a really interesting book. And, after reading it, I was working with the QWI data at this point. And I thought to myself, hey, I wonder if it's possible to see this in the data, to see the fall of Galesburg in the data that I was working with. And so I looked up what county, this jobs data, it's at the county level. I looked up what county Galesburg was in. Turns out it's in Knox County, okay, Knox County, Illinois. And I looked at the data for Knox County. And you can see, so this data is very detailed, okay? We have years going here on the horizontal, and we have different industries being displayed as these different lines up here on the vertical. And this vertical axis is just the number of people employed, okay? And you can see that most industries, it looks pretty level, right? Like this industry here, this is retail trade, okay? Pretty level, okay? So this would be like working for Walmart or something like that, okay? Pretty level. This line here, this is healthcare, okay? You can see healthcare jobs holding steady over time. But then have a look at this blue line here. This blue line is manufacturing, okay? And you can see, you can see very clearly this devastating fall, okay? It used to be with more than 6,000 employees. This used to be the predominant economic sector in the town of Galesburg. Okay, and then you can see starting in, and this is around maybe the year 1999 here, we have this precipitous fall down to next to nothing in the number of manufacturing jobs in Galesburg. Now, you know, I have this data not only for Galesburg, but for every county in the United States. So it's possible to compare this against some other counties. So for example, if I compare this to Detroit, okay, compare this to Detroit, you can see that Detroit, of course, is well known for manufacturing automobiles, and Detroit also suffered due to the decline of manufacturing in the United States. Okay, and you can see that manufacturing jobs did fall here, but you can also see that the decline was nowhere near as drastic in Detroit. Detroit is a larger city; it has a more diversified economy. Manufacturing was a smaller component of the overall jobs picture there. And if I compare both of those to Boston, Massachusetts, so Boston, as you may know, is sort of a hub for education and innovation in the Northeast United States. It's a very sort of high human capital, high technology job sort of environment, almost a little bit like Silicon Valley in a way. Okay, and you can see that Boston, didn't have too many manufacturing jobs to begin with. And what you see here is you don't see any evidence of this kind of crash of a major industry happening in Boston. Okay. And so what we did was we basically took all of this data and, as they were talking about in the movie, the goal is to kind of boil things down to a single number. And in this case, we boiled everything down to a single metric of how many jobs were lost in a given county over the last 20 or 30 years. Okay. And so here you can see this is our measure of total job decline as measured by number of people. Okay. This is across all industries here and across manufacturing only. Okay. And then we have that same number here being reported per worker. Okay. Now, of course, it's very important to report this, rather than just looking at the total number, to report the number controlling for the number of workers in the town or controlling for the total population of the town. Okay. Because, for example, you can see here that, if you look at the number of manufacturing jobs lost by Detroit, okay, it's a much larger number than Galesburg. But that's not really a fair comparison because Detroit is a much larger city than Galesburg. Okay. If we look at the per capita value, okay, you can see that basically, 16 out of 100 workers, 16 out of every 100 workers, manufacturing workers lost their job in Illinois, whereas that number is only 6 out of 100 for Detroit. So Galesburg's decline was actually much larger in per capita terms. Okay, so we came up with this metric to measure the total amount of job decline in different areas in the United States. Okay, and here's our results. Okay, so this is a picture on the top here. We have job decline across all industries, and in the bottom here, job decline for manufacturing only. Okay, and so again, the question that we want to ask is there some relationship between this pattern here and this pattern here earlier for the observed Republican votes? Okay, okay. So now, of course, we're not done. Okay, economics was only one of our independent variables. It represents this one theory, this economic theory of Trump's victory. But we also have this idea that it was that his rise was more about prejudice, and so so we needed to collect some data on that. And this is a little bit harder to find data on, but we did find some good data on this. Our independent variable, our main independent variable was individuals' views on race. And so to get a sense of this question, okay, we relied on a big survey. Okay, now we'll be doing a class survey, okay, in our class, because surveys are often, the best way to collect people's opinions about some sort of social or political issue. Okay, and so of course this survey is bigger than anything we'll be able to do in our class. This survey is called the Cooperative Congressional Election Survey. It's run out of Harvard University, but it involves Harvard collaborating with dozens of schools all over the country. Okay, and it's a very large survey, 60,000 respondents annually. And this survey asked people about their choice at the ballot box, as well as their views on a number of social and political issues. And embedded within this survey were 4 interesting questions, very interesting questions about race. And so here they are. So people who answered this survey were asked to respond, either, from strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree with respect to the following 4 questions. White people in the U.S. have certain advantages because of the color of their skin. Racial problems in the U.S. are rare, isolated situations. I am angry that racism exists. I often find myself fearful of other races. Okay, so these 4 questions about race. Now, the survey, it's not just these 4 questions, of course. It contains a lot of other information, a battery of social and demographic information, gender, income, religious views, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we really got some good data from this cooperative congressional election survey. Okay. And then finally, okay, once we had this data in hand, we just needed to put it all together, okay? Now, this CCES data, this data about racial views, is data collected from individuals. The elections data, this was data at the county level, okay? But luckily, the CCES records the zip code of each respondent. So we were able to take those zip codes, match them up to the county names, and then finally put all of our data together. And with all of our data put together, okay, we have the data on manufacturing decline, we have the data on racial views, we have the data on the outcome, which is the election results. We actually had a whole bunch of other variables as well. We even looked at like opioid use and opioid deaths, okay? We looked at a whole bunch of different issues. With this data all together, what we can essentially do is have them sort of compete in sort of a statistical horse race, okay? And one of the most commonly used tools to do this is something called a regression, okay? I don't know if you've heard of this word regression before, but this is a very basic and very widespread form of data analysis. And basically what a regression does is exactly what we needed it to do. A regression allows you to evaluate the impact of a number of different independent variables on a single dependent variable, okay? There are many different types of regressions, okay? But the one we chose is called a multinomial logistic regression. And, and so let me show you guys, what this looks like. Okay, so here are our results, okay? And I'll provide a link to, you guys can follow this link from the slides and look at this yourself if you want to, okay? Let me try to explain what's going on here. So have a look at this column. You'll see that the title of this column is Vote Trump GE. So that means somebody voted for Trump in the general elections, okay? And now you'll notice that these are sorted. These are sort of color-coded, okay? And the reason for that is I'm currently sorting on this column with strong red values indicating that the corresponding variable, the corresponding independent variable, was very negatively associated with the Trump vote, and a green indicating that it was very strongly positively associated with the Trump vote. Okay, and so over here in this column, I have our independent variables. Okay, so you can see that the strongest single negative predictor of a Trump vote was being African American. Okay, so if you are a black voter, you were, and this number here has a specific interpretation. Okay, so this number here minus 0.149, let's round that to 0.15. So this is basically saying that in our data, what we were finding was that if you were a black voter, you were 15% less likely to vote for Trump than if you were not a black voter. Okay, so this was the single strongest negative predictor of a Trump vote. Okay, and then you can see there are some other predictors. Okay, for example, if you were female, okay, you were significantly less likely to vote for Trump. If you were a college graduate, you were 5% less likely to vote for Trump, okay, etc. Now, I want you to have a look at this one. Okay, so this number that I have in bold here, this is manufacturing crash in county. Okay, so this basically means that your county experienced a significant decline in manufacturing jobs. And you can see here that this was not really very strong of a predictor at all. This basically said that, if you lived in a county that experienced a crash in manufacturing, you were only, 0.7% more likely to vote for Trump. Okay. Moreover, and this is something that we'll talk about going forward, associated with each one of these estimates is another number. This number I have in the adjacent column here. This is called the p-value. Okay, and what the p-value is it's a measure of statistical significance. It's essentially a measure of your confidence in any of these numbers. Now, a p-value of 0, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but a p-value of 0 indicates that you are very confident. Okay, so essentially a p-value of 0 would be associated with a statistical significance or a confidence level of essentially 100%. Okay. Now, usually for a result to be acceptable, for you to really say, okay, this result is actually saying something, you need the p-value to be less than 0.05, a 5% p-value. Okay, so you can see that, these earlier variables that I talk about, they all have a very low p-value, meaning that the corresponding estimate is very statistically significant. Okay, however, this manufacturing crash in the county, it came out as a p-value of 0.44. That's basically a wash. That's basically saying that this estimate is statistically insignificant. Okay, and so, not only did we find that, a manufacturing crash in the county actually seems to reduce your probability of voting for Trump by a very small amount, but moreover, that result was not statistically significant, meaning that this variable, as far as we could tell, had very little impact on people's votes for Donald Trump. Okay, the same thing is true. So that's a manufacturing crash in the county. The same thing was pretty much true for an economic crash in the county. Okay, we found a very small positive but statistically insignificant effect. Okay, so I think between those two results, this is casting some doubt on this idea that manufacturing was a huge driver of people's votes. Okay. Okay, so what did we find were the strongest positive predictors? The independent variables which would make it most likely for you to vote for Trump. Well, so the single strongest positive predictor of a Trump vote was, of course, being Republican. Okay, so if you were a Republican, you were 72% more likely to vote for Trump. But we found that the second strongest predictor was actually your views on race. And I should explain here that what we did was we took people's responses to these 4 questions and we coded them so that the more sort of conservative or the more, I shouldn't necessarily say that, but the more prejudiced answer, okay, was sort of coded as a 5, okay, and the more progressive answer was coded as a 0. So you can see that some of these actually ask the question in a little bit of a different direction. So we consistently coded everything. And then we just took the average of your results on answering all 4 of these questions. Okay. So for example, if you answered that you're not angry that racism exists, then you were coded to have sort of a higher, you were coded higher on this scale. If you answered that you strongly agree that you find yourself fearful of other races, then you were assigned a very high score on this scale. Okay, and so what we found was that this scale, okay, this views on race index was the second strongest predictor of a Trump vote after Republican Party identification. Okay, and that if you were essentially very high on this scale, you were upwards of 62% more likely to have voted for Donald Trump. Okay, so now we actually went a step further than this. Okay, so the powerful thing about having these models is not only can you try to parse out and explain what factors are more important, you can subsequently use the model to actually predict how an individual with given traits would vote. And so what we essentially did was we sort of reran, we had this hypothetical scenario where we reran the election, given different assumptions about the American electorate. So let me show you guys how these work. let's see here. Actually, in fact, why don't I just show you the version from the paper itself? That might be a little bit cleaner here. Yeah, here we go. So oops. Give me a second. My computer's spazzing out a little bit. Let me just download it and try to open it in. Let me try to download it and opening it in a different software here. One sec. Here we go. Okay, let me share this window with you. Okay, so here is basically our projection of what would have happened in the 2016 election, okay, given different values of, for example, job decline. Okay, so for example, so this is assuming basically that everybody lived in a county with a 90th percentile value of job decline, so a very high value of job decline. This is assuming everybody lives in a county more like Boston with a very low level of job decline. And this column is the same thing, okay, except looking at, instead of all sorts of job decline, just looking at decline in manufacturing only, okay? And what you'll see here is that basically, all of these maps look very similar, okay? We found that basically, even if you project the elections and assume that, a 90th versus a 10th percentile level of job decline, it really made very little difference in the overall electoral outcome, okay? But again, if you look at some of these measures having to do with race or with immigration, you have a very different story, okay? So for example, this question, not angry about racism, okay? If basically everybody had answered strongly disagree to this question, okay, you can see here that the Democrats would have won the election, 303 electoral votes to 235. Okay, so this would have been basically a landslide for Hillary. If everybody is instead a 5 on this question, if they strongly, agree with not being angry about racism, then it completely flips the election in the opposite direction. So this is showing a Republican victory of about 140 electoral votes or 130 electoral votes. So okay, so our conclusion in this paper was that despite this narrative of economics and manufacturing playing a big role in the election, based on the data that we were looking at least, it seemed to be the case that these social views, that racial prejudice or people's views on immigrants, I didn't show you the results for that, but we also looked at people's views on immigration, that these are actually the strongest drivers to people voting for Trump and for Trump being elected into office. Okay, so I think that's a good stopping point. Hopefully that gives you a sort of a more detailed sense of what applied microeconomics is. Everything that I've just talked about is applied microeconomics. Okay, and in the next video, we'll talk briefly about why this is a great time to study this subject, and then I'll talk briefly about your homework.